Hello everybody, Nick here at Scoggin-Dickey. We're actually very excited to be here today. We're back in my shop like we used to have in some of the older videos. And yes, before the comment section blows up, no, I have not touched any of my projects. We have been so busy working on new things and helping out our customers that I haven't been able to come out here to finish anything. But it's all right. We're actually out here with kind of a new project. Now, when we first started our tech videos, the whole reason we started these videos was to help out our customers. We were noticing we were getting calls endlessly all day long of customers asking the same questions, wanting information. So we wanted to provide you that information. Not only did it save you guys time, it also saved us time so we could help more customers. And it worked out great. Dane and I, we love making these videos. And we're going to keep doing them for you. We got a lot of cool ones planned, and one of them is today. Some of you more eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed, this engine only has 3 exhaust ports on the side. That's right. This is the 4.3 liter V6. LV3 code is what they call it, and it came with the 2014 and over trucks and some of the express vans. Now, at first you might be thinking, why in the world are you messing with this? Well, unlike the other 4.3, which was actually a really tough engine, my white truck originally came with the old 4.3. It was tough as nails, but man, it was down on power. It got terrible gas mileage, but it was still a good engine. These are even better. We've been out here messing with one. This is actually one that came in for a DOD failure. Yes, these do have displacement on demand like the V8s, and we've been learning more about it. And one of the reasons we learned more about it was for 2 things. One, I had a coworker at Scoggin-Dickey that happened to have one of these. We actually were running around doing some errands, and I didn't even know that it was a V6 truck. I didn't even know it had this engine until we left a stoplight. I gave it a little bit of gas, and the exhaust note sounded funny. And when I looked at him, that's when he goes, yeah, it's a V6. I didn't even know it was a 4.3 instead of a 5.3. But it made great power. It drove around all day, and I never suspected it. And that's why they sold so many of these. This engine option is way cheaper than the V8s. It gets a little bit better gas mileage, but it runs and drives great. Even has a decent towing rating. So we wanted to look more into it. The second reason was actually a guy. We'd like to give him a little bit of a thanks here. His name is Dan Jost. He does Jost Boosted. And he actually took one of these and took the Gray National, you know, the black Darth Vader car, looking car from the 80s. He took the Turbo 3.8 out of it. He actually threw in one of these modified, a Holly High Ram, which is really cool. You got to Google his name and his car and check this out. And actually boosted one of these. And if you think it made 350, 400, look it up. It made a lot more than that. And it does it without breaking a sweat. These are really tough little engines. They borrowed a lot of the technology from the V8s, the displacement on demand, but also the direct injection. A steel forged crankshaft, these great cylinder heads, and a super strong block. So that's why we came out here to learn more about it. And we learned that you can do a DOD delete on these too. And that's what this video is going to be. We're going to show you all the stuff needed to do a DOD delete on this. And I got some parts behind me, just like in our other videos. I'm going to show you what you get. Of course, you get 2 brand new GM cylinder head gaskets and the bolts. They are the same as the other LTs, but there's only 16 of them. You also get a new set of lifters. Again, only 12 lifters instead of 16, so this kit might actually be a little bit cheaper. We also included the new lifter guides. If you notice, we're only including 2 instead of the usual 8 with the 8-cylinder version. That is because these reuse one of the lifter guides in there. We'll show you that here in just a little while too. You also get a new camshaft. Naturally, GM did make a non-DOD version of this engine. These are called the LV3. There was some less common applications, mostly in foreign countries and some of those bigger vans, called an LV1. Exact same cam specs, just with a non-DOD function. While we wish they put them in more of y'all's applications, the good news is that this camshaft is available from GM, very cheap. So good, high quality product for a cheap price, which we all love that. Now, you also get the DOD plugs. There's only 3 of them. We're actually going to show you where you need to put those plugs. So, saves you a couple bucks there too. If you're wondering if you could just get a replacement valley cover, kind of like the Gen 4 5.3, sometimes we sell them with a valley cover to remove that whole system, you can get the LV1 cover. It's very, very expensive. So it's not worth it. We don't want to charge extra money if you don't need it. Plugs work great. They'll save you quite literally a couple $100. Another thing we include is a new cam bolt, or GM likes to call it a valve because it also doubles as a valve for the variable valve timing system. We do include these new. They are not that expensive. It's a drop in the bucket. The reason we include them new is GM does not recommend reusing them. They only give us a torque spec for using a new one. We know that you find some people that have reused these. Please don't. We've also found some customers that have tried to reuse the old one and it snapped off in the camshaft and caused all sorts of issues. So cheap insurance, don't bother with it. You also get a balancer bolt. You get new water pump gaskets, just like the other LTs. These use a little crushed metal gasket without any sealant on them. Real trick stuff and very cheap. And also a new front cover seal. If you notice, we haven't included an oil pan gasket or a front cover gasket or anything like that. What you'll need to get on your own from your local auto parts stores, you can get ready to do this job, you need to get some gray oil-safe sealant. They did not use gaskets on these. Saved them some cost, made it quicker for production use as well, and they use sealant on the front of these covers. It's actually really great. I prefer it if you want my honest opinion, but you will need to snag that, a couple bucks at your local auto parts store, no big deal. Now, like our other DOD videos, we kind of show you what you can get, we kind of show you what's involved and why or why not we include some parts and some others, but we've never actually had a chance to dig into one and actually show you what a DOD process looks like. Like I said before, we're way too busy doing other things and taking care of customers. Sometimes this happens, sometimes we just get too caught up and we just don't have the time. We wanted to do one for the old 5.3 LT engines, but anybody that's getting that job done, they just want their truck back on the road. They don't want to let us have it for a week so we can do a video on it. But this came to us as a core and we were able to use it. So for our first time, we're going to do kind of a mild DIY here. And I do mean mild, it's not a full DIY. There's a reason for that. First and foremost, the engine's not even in the truck, so I can't show you how to take the fuel system and the intake off. The accessory drive, the exhaust system, the electrics, all sorts of stuff that you need to do to get down to this form that you see it here. But we do want to show you kind of some do's and don'ts, kind of some tips and tricks. We see and hear about a lot of stuff. So we are going to take this apart, but we are going to show you what it takes to do one. Now, I got some tools back here. Got a couple torque wrenches. Big boy over here is made for the head bolts because it's real high torque. This is kind of more mid-range. It's going to do some of the other bolts here that need maybe not as much torque. Of course, there's also a full table full of gaskets and other tools. Make sure you use a good balancer puller and installer. Don't hammer it on and off. You're just going to break stuff and damage the insides. But we got other tools we're going to show you. And real quick, we're going to show you how to properly clean off the head gasket surfaces on both the engine and the block. The reason we're going to do that is we hear a lot of people that do it the wrong way. They damage them. One of the ways is to use a metal razor blade. It can gouge up the aluminum surface, so don't do that. The other one we've heard is this. I actually have these myself for other uses. Kind of looks like a little rubber, maybe plastic scrub brush, but it's actually full of an abrasive material. Same thing with this. It kind of looks like a Brillo pad on a disc. You hook these up to an air tool and they can go over the surfaces on both the head and the block to clean off gasket material. And yes, these do a great job of cleaning off that gasket material, but you can see on the inside here, they spit out micro abrasives everywhere. It goes into your coolant ports, your oil, where your head bolts go, and where your cylinders and your piston rings are. Please do not use these on an engine that you are just taking halfway apart, doing a job, and putting back together. I know, it's very tempting to use these. These are so easy to use, but this abrasive left in your engine will cause damage. There's no way to clean it all the way out. The only time I use these is when I'm working on something that isn't an engine, or I'm cleaning off a block to take up to the machine shop and have them do a full hot tank dip a couple times to really get this stuff out of here so I don't have to worry about it. So please, no shortcuts. We're going to be showing you a lot of tips and tricks. This is a big one. Please stay clear of these. So, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to change into a slightly nicer shirt so I don't ruin this very nice shirt that my work bought for me. I'll be right back to show you what we can do. All right, so I'm in a painter smock that I stole from my wife. Thank you, sweetheart. And a pair of gloves. We would recommend that because this is going to be a bit of a job here. Keep in mind we are at a shop that I share with not only a friend, but we got other neighbors that are working on cars. So if you hear hot rods and other stuff in the background, just ignore it. Being that this engine is already out of the truck, we have it here on a stand to show you a little bit better. It's a little clearer seeing it like this. There are some things that you need to know before you get to this point here. You are going to need to drain your coolant and remove your radiator. You're going to be pulling a camshaft out of the front of this. The radiator does have to be removed. The same thing goes with your exhaust manifolds. You are going to have to remove the spark plugs. These aren't here because this was a core engine. Spark plugs, spark plug wires, and coils. You're going to have to pull all this off, as well as your exhaust manifolds, at least off and out of the way so you can get the heads off. Same thing goes for the top half of the wiring harness, the intake manifold, your water pump, and your balancer, as well as your fuel system. This is very stripped down, and of course, as you can see, there's not even many bolts in it because I've taken this apart and put it back together a couple times to learn about it to show you guys. So keep in mind, this is a bit of a job. It's not that hard of a job though in the vehicle. It's just more time consuming because it's mostly just moving stuff out of the way. I got a big table full of tools here I'll be using and showing you. None of them are power tools, and there's actually very few specialty tools you need, and we sell the tools that you need, and they're actually pretty inexpensive, and you can use them for a lot of applications. So even a decent investment in case you want to do this or help a friend or a family member do the same thing to their vehicle. So definitely useful stuff to have. So keep in mind, it's AC, alternator, water pump, all this stuff you just pull, set off to the side and set out of the way. And try to do this in a clean environment. For instance, I'm inside of a shop here. It still gets dusty. I still had to sweep up pretty good, but don't do what I did when I was a kid and try to rebuild an engine or transmission in a dirty driveway, especially out here in West Texas where the wind blows. You do not want dirt or sand or any silicates, debris, any nasty stuff going inside of your engine. You are going to be putting this back together. You need gasket surfaces that are going to seal up properly. You're going to need an oil system that does not have crap in it that's getting sucked in through there and chewing up everything. You don't want to do any damage while you're doing this job. So keep in mind, again, that's why we said this wasn't 100% DIY. Most of it's taken off. One of the first things that you notice here is we don't have an oil pan on this engine. This is one of the bigger debates on doing this job is, do you need to remove the oil pan or not? We will be showing you the correct way to do this and explaining why you shouldn't do it some other ways you might have seen videos on. The oil pan is required to be removed. It's not that difficult though. It is simple as lifting up the engine. Sometimes you can use an engine hoist on the top here and kind of loosening up your motor mounts to clear. And you can see why there's an oil pump hanging down here, and that's actually the main problem. You do have to remove this oil pump. There's really no good way around it, even though you might have seen a couple other videos of guys showing you ways to do it. So it's not that bad to get off. It's actually not even that big of an oil pan. I got it on, actually got it right here. It's a pretty small piece, pretty cool though. The pickup tube and everything's integrated into it. So once you take this off, you just need a few inches to get it out of the way and slide it out. Not that big of a deal. It's not that hard of a job. A lot of guys keep trying to find a way around this to make this job easier. I have used some of these amateur techniques to try to do this job in the past on V8s, and of course this one on the bench. It's not that easier, it's not that quicker. So we're gonna show you the right way to do it because it doesn't take any longer and it isn't any harder. So let's dive right in here and start when it comes to taking off these cylinder heads. There will be bolts inside of here that you need to take off. They use a 15mm socket. I don't have any of the bolts in here right now. These heads are actually just resting on top of this engine on the dowels because we've already taken it off. The head bolts and the head gaskets are not reusable at all whatsoever, regardless of what you hear online. Please do not try to reuse them. We have seen horror stories with leaks. We have seen horror stories with the bolts snapping off in the block because somebody tried to reuse a head bolt like this. They are torque to yield bolts. They have an elasticity about the metallurgy in them. And once they've been stretched at that torque and then heat cycled, they are not giving you the same clamping effect that they're supposed to. And we have seen them break off in an engine block where they're brittle. And believe me, I've done it. Getting one out is a nightmare and is It'll add several hours or days to the job trying to do it right without doing damage to the block. We've heard too many horror stories. Please learn from us. Please learn from other customers' mistakes who have called us up with issues. We are here to show you how to do this right. The bolts aren't even that expensive, so believe me, that's not the expense of the kit. The kit's actually a pretty good price. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this cylinder head off here and kind of show you what you're looking at inside of this thing. Now that you've taken this off and taken a good look at it, you might be thinking, wow, my engine has domed pistons from the factory. And yes, actually the direct injection engines do. It's part of the design that makes that unique injection system work inside of the cylinder when it's running and firing. Now, the 4.3 V6 actually comes from the factory with 11-to-1 compression. That is not a misprint, that is not a typo, and I did not say that wrong. 11-to-1 compression, and they can do that on 86 octane. That is pretty amazing as to why these things, A, make so much power and torque, but B, run so well on pump gas. That direct injection system really allows them to crank that compression up so you get all the benefits that everybody used to get back in the day racing in something that you drive every day to Home Depot. So let's take a look here at the actual lifters and lifter trays here. This is actually pretty unique, and you'll notice some similarities between the LTs and the LSs, but a couple unique bits. First of all, here is where the DOD lifters and the tray is going to be. Now, take a 10mm socket to get this off. It's not a big deal. If you'll notice, take special care where you put your bolts. These bolts have a special lip so they can be tightened on these. They aren't just any other bolt. So don't lose these, and don't try to put any other bolt in them. If you do, you can actually crack this plastic, and it does need to be retained properly. But let's see if I can get this out without losing a lifter. All right, there we go. Now the two non-DOD lifters stayed in the block. Pretty common. You can usually grab them with your fingers, or if you're very gentle, a pair of pliers. Don't do any damage. But these are the DOD lifters themselves. You usually see they got some springs here. These are the ones that collapse when the solenoids kick on and off to cut this into V4 mode. And that is correct. It is a V6, but just like the V8s, it goes down to a V4. It doesn't do a weird V3 or V2 or anything weird like that. It just cuts a couple cylinders off, but it was enough, of course, to pass emissions and improve gas mileage, so that's why GM went with the system. But unfortunately, just like a lot of you customers are figuring out, 75, 80,000 miles, sometimes longer. We have customers that go longer. They find the system finally starts to let go. These lifters start ticking. Again, just like other DOD systems, this starts ticking. Please stop driving your truck. You can do a lot of damage to this by keep going. And I don't mean just to the lifters and to the cam. You can destroy a lot of stuff in here. We have seen where lifter boards are chewed up. That is such an expensive repair. You'll just get a new engine. It's way cheaper and easier. You throw so much metal shavings into the oil, you will wipe out all your bearings and screw up your cylinders. Please don't make the same mistakes as others have. That's why we're doing this video, is to help you guys out. So please listen when we tell you, don't drive it for very much longer. Either drive it to your garage and start taking it apart, or drive it to your local independent repair facility and have them start doing this job. But what I thought was kind of neat is how they retained the lifters on this little cylinder here. They made a special retainer that is literally just half of the other retainer, and of course it has normal lifters in it. So let's take a look here. Oop, am I gonna get a lifter? No, it's all right. But yeah, look at that, just like the other one. They almost made a half one, kind of unique. You are going to save this particular lifter retainer here. We are going to include a new one of these. They need to be different for the non-DOD style lifters. You can't reuse these. And we are going to include all new lifters. I know that you can technically reuse these, but they are so cheap, especially since you only have to do 12 instead of 16. If you're going to be in here doing the work, a couple extra bucks, it is absolutely worth it to do that. So you'll be reusing this one here, so keep this with the bolts. Now, let's take that front cover off and take a look at how unique the inside of this is compared to a 5.3. So now that you've gotten this all torn down and you're wanting to take the valley cover off, or sometimes called a vlom, as they say, a manifold, you actually need to take your front timing cover off first. Now you've taken your water pump off already. We include new water pump gaskets, so they're pretty nice steel shim design, so that makes it easier, a little less cleanup you have to do on the block and the water pump for good sealing. Save the bolts, save the water pump, set them to the side. Same thing goes with the balancer here. You will not reuse your balancer bolt, but of course you're going to reuse your balancer as long as it's in good shape. Please make sure you use a good balancer puller tool like the one I got here. This is actually made specifically for balancers. It goes in there, grabs on, and you twist and it pulls off. Matter of fact, I've used this so much I think I might have to get a new one. But you do need to make sure to get the right tools and do the right work for pulling that balancer off, and at the end when putting it on you need a good installer as well. Do not use the bolt to put the balancer back on, or some other methods we've heard of trying to beat it on there. All you're doing is damage to the inside of the engine when you're trying to like hammer them on like that. Or you can snap this balancer bolt in the same way I told you about snapping a cylinder head bolt. They are not designed to do what you're trying to do with it. So always make sure to use the proper tools. I do save the balancer bolt. You might have to turn this over. That's a great thing to do to put this back in here now that there's no spark plugs on it. Of course, the cylinder head's off and stuff like that. There's no cylinder pressure to hold you back, so you can turn it over freely by hand. The balancer bolt here uses a 22 millimeter socket, so keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and take this off, and I'm going to show you a little trick with this wiring harness on the inside. Yes, you heard me right, wiring harness on the inside. So let's see. All these front cover bolts use a 13 millimeter socket and just are on hand tight. Keep in mind though, if you noticed, some of these bolts are going to be put in at different lengths than other ones. These top three here, the cover's a little bit thicker. The ones along the side here, the cover's a little thinner, so they'll be shorter bolts. And then down here, I think I got two. They are going to be much longer than the rest of them. So maybe get a sandwich baggie if you can borrow something else from your wife like I just did, and make sure to put those in there, label them, know where they are so you don't get them mixed up. You don't want to mix these up. It either won't grab enough threads and clamp on like it's supposed to, or worse, you put a long bolt in a short hole, really crank it on there, and you crack the block and cause a million other issues. So again, take your time and make sure you do this right. This isn't a hard job, it's just a tedious job. Get these off real quick. So now that I got those bolts off, let's pull this off. Now there usually is a little harness on here that connects the wiring harness to your cam position sensor, which I've already pulled out. You don't need to pull it out, leave it on. I did that for my own interests. Of course, your VVT actuator, you're not going to touch that either. And there's a little connector that connects that outer harness to this inner harness. Now, you'll see what I'm talking about. The front cover is held on with like a silicone, a sealant, instead of a gasket. GM did that to save cost, which helps kind of keep the vehicles a little bit cheaper for you guys, but mainly so they could do them quicker. Less gasket, less money. Quick machine puts that bead on. All right, let's take this off and see what we got going on here. Now you saw me tilt this out of the way for a very good reason. You can see that inner harness. It goes to the oil pump solenoid here. That's right, if you watched one of our earlier videos where we talk about the variable displacement oil pump that GM has been using on all these engines, this one has it too. They really did borrow all the technology from the Gen 5 LT engines, like the 5.3, the 6.2, and the Corvettes and everything, into this engine, which is really great. They didn't skimp on anything. So you get all these great benefits and you bought a cheaper truck, which is great. So before you take this off, you do need to disconnect it from the oil pump here. Sometimes these connectors can be a little hard to get. Naturally, they're covered in oil. So sometimes it takes a very small flathead screwdriver and some diligence. Be easy, be gentle with it. You can get this off pretty quickly. Let's see how quick I can get it off here and not break it. Ah, there we go. So nice. Set this off to the side and be careful with it. If you can kind of see there, I was a little bit too hard with it, and it broke a little bit of that plastic sheathing on there. You don't want that broken and hanging around in your engine. So again, learn from our mistakes, be a little more easier with this stuff. So now you can see what's kind of going on here in this area behind the timing cover. And you can also see why you might have to remove this oil pump. Compared to a small block Chevy, of course, big block or maybe a Gen 3 LS, some of the earlier ones, there is way more stuff going on behind the scenes here, but all for really good reasons. We're going to explain a little bit of this to you. This is, of course, the oil pump. You've seen a video about that. That's why it's hanging down here so low. There's a whole lot more going on here than an LS engine. You got your upper cam sprocket here. It's got the VVT actuator inside of it. We'll be explaining some of that as well. There's all sorts of tensioners and guides on either side of the timing chain here. This upper timing chain is a balance shaft. All of the V6 engines come with a balance shaft. Because these are a 90-degree V6, it needs some help. So it's just for, its harshness. It's so it doesn't shake the truck at idle. Not like a cool cammed hot rod, unfortunately. But they do that to make it better for the experience of driving it. So they do a pretty unique chain setup here to run a balance shaft that's running through this block. And we'll show you that here in a minute. If you want to hear a really cool little fun fact, your 4.3 liter engine actually uses the same cam sprocket as the new LT2 V8 in the C8 Corvette. That's right, because they don't have a balance shaft. They actually have an internal vacuum pump for crankcase evap, and it actually uses the same sprocket in another chain setup. So kind of a neat little fun fact about your engine. Now, before we take this oil pump off, there's something you need to do, and this is pretty special. This is one of the tools that you are going to need. You cannot skimp on this. You can't eyeball this. You have to do this right. And we got this tool from ICT Billet, and it's actually an oil pump alignment tool. And you might be looking at that going, how in the world is that going to align my oil pump? It actually bolts up on some of these bolts up here for your timing cover, and actually keeps it located in terms of up or down movement. There's a really good reason for that. Do you remember the oil pan? Let me show it to you again. That big oval O-ring right there is your pickup tube. It's actually pretty neat that they actually integrated this into the oil pan. It makes it a whole lot easier for us that are working on it. The problem is this oil pump needs to be perfectly spaced from the oil pan rail to the bottom of the oil pump so that seals properly. You don't want to push it down too much. It might squeeze this O-ring and split it or fold it in half and cause a leak, or the other way, it doesn't squish it enough and it sucks up air. This is under vacuum. It is sucking oil up from the bottom of the oil pan here into the oil pump through the rest of your engine. If you suck in air through this thing, you get air bubbles in your oil. That is defeating the purpose of what oil does, and causing a film of protection against metal wearing parts, and it will ruin an engine very quickly. So this is not something to skimp on. This is not something to try to dodge around. You need this tool to do this properly. So I took my gloves off so I could actually work on this a little bit better, but you can see that's what it does. They supply the bolts for you, and it's these specific little tangs hanging off here that you use the timing cover bolts to do, and it pushes up against the top of the oil pump. So the oil pump has not been loosened. You're leaving this torqued while you do this, and you very simply mount that on, hand tighten these with a 10mm socket and socket wrench, and you're just nicely firming, pushing down on the top here. So when you take this oil pump off, you leave these on, do all your work. When it's time to put this oil pump back on, you put it back in that same spot, and as you snug up those bolts, you just make sure that the oil pump is pushed up against them. They're a locator, that's all they are, but it is absolutely crucial that you do not try to skip on this step. So now that we got those little alignment tools locked down, big thanks to ICT Billet for that. We really like y'all's products, and we continue to use them quite a bit. Now it's time to remove the oil pump itself. I did remove that balancer bolt. I had that in there earlier. You'll need to do that so it'll clear when you get it out here. So take, again, your 13mm socket, loosen these bolts, and go ahead and take all four out. One thing I like about these newer LT engines that I'll go ahead and share with you, almost all the bolts on this engine have these really neat little plastic alignment sleeves. I don't know if you can see that right there. And It helps keep everything located and kind of snug. If you worked on an LS or especially an old small block, everything kind of seems a little loosey-goosey when you're putting it together. They really did go the extra mile to make sure these engines were truly easy to work on and kind of perfected. You will sometimes pull a bolt out and it'll come with it. Sometimes you'll pull a bolt out and it'll still be inside of there. It's okay if you want to leave them in. It's okay if you want to take them out. Just make sure not to lose them. Or in the case of reassembling this engine, don't push it back in there somewhere and you have to find it, take all this back apart. Again, learn from our mistakes so you don't have to repeat them. So all 4 bolts out, it slides out perfectly straight. And again, that is why the oil pan had to be removed. You can see the oil pan would have been right here. It actually covers up this oil pan, or this oil pump at the bottom right here. There is no way to get this out with that oil pan in the way. So much so that we thought about cutting a little service window into our oil pan because we know this is kind of a pain, but honestly, it's work either way. So just do it right, and you won't have to worry about anything. There we are, look at that. Now that we got this off here, before you go any further, I am going to put this bolt back in. So I've put the balancer bolt, the old balancer bolt, back in the crank snout here so I can turn this engine over. I'm grabbing my big socket. Now what you're trying to do is, just like any other V8, you are trying to line up the lower timing gear to the upper timing gear, and there will be a dot on the lower timing gear and actually an arrow on the upper timing gear. And you're trying to get those to point at each other so you know that you were at top dead center and all the stars have aligned. There's actually a very special sequence that this all has to be in to work properly, not only for the camshaft actuation, but you get this balance shaft at a time. Not only is it not counteracting the off balances that a V6 naturally has in your truck, it'll actually make them a lot worse. And again, it's not cool like you have a cammed engine or anything like that. It's just something that might make your wife pretty upset if she drives it one day and things shaking like wild. So let's take this here. I've already gotten kind of close. Let's get it all lined up. Yeah, there we go. It's all lined up. So the lower gear and the upper gear are now timed together. What you will notice is that there's a second arrow on this upper timing gear. Once you get this all lined up, it is going to be on the side. It's actually an arrow pointing inwards, and it's because of this balance shaft chain. Once you get that aligned and get the upper balancer aligned, you'll also notice that there's another dot on the balancer gear. This is your balance shaft here. This is the tensioner. And that dot needs to be pointing right at the 3 o'clock position. This line here needs to be pointing at the 12 o'clock position. Sometimes you have to do a lot of rotations to find out where this goes. Don't fret too much about it. You mostly will get this all back together and do it right that time. But there's actually even dark colored links in the chain to know exactly when to time all this up. So now that we have this all together, let's start taking it apart. So now that we got this apart, the first thing we're going to be doing, once we got everything timed up, is we're going to be taking off the balance shaft chain. This is actually a bit of a special process. GM actually has a couple special tools, a couple little wires that hold a few of the tensioners out of the way. You don't exactly have to purchase those tools. You can all do it by hand. It's very easy. I can do it myself, so I know that y'all can too. So let me show you exactly how to take this apart. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to loosen this bolt up here. Now, this takes a Allen, and I believe the one I used here was a 5/16. It fit it perfectly. I know in a metric engine 5/16, but it fit perfect. You're just going to loosen it about a turn or two. You'll notice if you push down on it, it actually slides. That's what this is a tensioner. So you're going to push it all the way down with your thumb and then retighten it. That'll hold it at full slack so you're able to work on this. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take off this guide here using these 2 bolts. Now this is a T30 Torx bit, and I've already loosened them up with a wrench. You will need to put on like a socket wrench to do it, but I have a nice little screwdriver here and I'll show you. You're going to take the top bolt out all the way. Set it carefully off to the side. The lower bolt you're going to do out just a handful of turns. The guide will then come out. As you can see here, upper bolt hole, that's actually slotted for a reason. Leave that bolt in there the way it is. It keeps all this stuff in alignment as well. So set this carefully off to the side. Also check for wear. Again, if you're one of our more eagle-eyed viewers, you might notice that this looks pretty new. From what I've understood, most of these aren't that worn out. Ours had deep, deep grooves from this chain from the balance shaft, which is kind of strange. This actually doesn't see that much load, and it doesn't seem, even when I show you later, the tension on this is actually kind of a little slacky as well. So it's kind of strange that it got worn out so bad. So we went ahead and replaced it with a new one. If you take yours apart and you need it, give us a ring. We keep these in stock and we'll sell you one. They're pretty cheap. What I personally have noticed is taking that sprocket out and trying to get it aligned back on this balance shaft is kind of difficult. When this sprocket's off, the balance shaft moves back and forth, kind of the same way the cam does when there's not a sprocket on it. And I found it kind of to be more difficult. So I'm going to show you a method that we actually found to be a little bit easier. And you are going to now loosen this up again. Not that bad, because you just did it by hand. You'll notice it just slacked back up. So you're going to take this bolt out all the way, kind of hold this back. Take that bolt, set it off to the side. Now, this with the chain still on it, you're going to pull this out just a little bit. Kind of roll it out of the way there. And now you can take the chain off. Set this aside, make sure it's in a nice clean spot when you're setting apart all your stuff here. Don't put them on the dirty driveway. Put them on a nice spot like a cart, a bag, trash bag, whatever you have to keep this nice and clean. You're reusing this stuff. So now that we got the balance shaft chain off and that tensioner out of this top here, we can now take this valley cover off. And this is where you're going to really need to get into to put the DOD plugs in. So grab a 13mm wrench again. Let's take this off. So now we all got it loosened up. Again, this is put on with a thin amount of sealant here at the front and the back. It takes a little bit of prime, but it comes off pretty easy. I've already taken this apart, so that's why you're not hearing a big suction cup sound when I pull this thing off. But there it is right there. Just like the LS's, just like the LT's, these have a set of solenoids and oil passages in them to actuate those lifters for the DOD function. Now, a lot of our 5.3 DOD kits specifically for the Gen 4 LS engine, we include a new valley cover to delete all this, and it includes all the O-rings to seal everything off up here. The LT engines never had a non-DOD engine in this application. This does, but the valley cover for it is very expensive. It's about as expensive as this thing. So for our DOD kits, we include the plugs, the DOD plugs you've seen in our other videos. They are perfectly great at doing exactly what we need them to do. We do them this way to save you guys some money because we feel very confident that these are going to work perfectly like they have for many years for many customers. And it just saves you a couple bucks. Who doesn't want that? Now, as you can see here, this is the same DOD plug as the LS and the other LTs. I like to call them little bullets because that's what they're shaped like. And they tap in to these oil holes up here to block it off to get this system fully deleted. This is required to do, and it takes a bit of a special hand to do this properly. Mostly because I have very fat fingers and I'm about to smash them with a hammer. But you do have to put these in with a hammer. Be gentle, don't go wild, don't go crazy. You can push these too far in a block and crack it and cause a bunch of other issues. I've actually heard of some customers, they do a little trick where they put these in the freezer or the fridge overnight. When they go to put them in, they've shrunk up a hair. They can tap them in as it re-expands with a little bit of room temp. They're in there perfectly. So maybe that's a tip that I should have done. Again, you're going easy, you're going slow. You're not cramming this in there like a kid hammering nails. You want to make sure to not do any damage. It's very hard to see on these bullets, but the very top has a lip. I would say it's about 3 millimeters, maybe 2.5 millimeters thick. You are going to hit up to that point, and it is going to leave that a little raised. That's perfectly okay. You do that because there's recesses in the top of that cover. So once you put this on, it'll still go on just fine. So That ridge is there for a reason. Do not hammer past it. You will do damage to the block. Now that we got the tensioner and the chain off for the balance shaft, now we can get to the actual camshaft and this camshaft actuator, this upper timing chain, whatever you want to call it. First thing you're going to have to do, you're going to have to relieve the tension on this tensioner here. You'll notice there's a tiny little slot in the top here. If you want to take a very thin Allen key, you know, it's the Allen key that you never use in your kit of Allen keys, but you'll need a very, very thin one, thinner than pencil lead it seems. And what you're going to do is with your hands, you're going to push this untensioned and then slide this through up here, and it'll actually hold off that tension for you while you work on it. There we go. So now that you got that tension unlocked, you got the balance shaft chain out of the way. Now it's time to finally get to this. The upper cam sprocket, your VVT actuator, all of it. And it takes a single bolt. Hint, the same socket you used to take off your balancer, the same socket for that bolt. Now it is going to take a lot of torque to undo this. Not only the balancer bolt, but that cam bolt as well is under a lot of torque. So you've taken the cylinder heads off, you no longer have something like a compression in a cylinder holding the engine from rotating. So you try to put a socket in this, turn it, you're just going to keep turning this engine over a million times. You're never going to get this loose. So I have brand new here in a bag because I can't find mine personally. I bought from them, but again, ICT billet came in on the clutch and they got us one of these. This is a flywheel holding tool, and you will put it in the same spot as your starter. You'll unbolt your starter out of the way. You will put this in place, and those teeth will bite onto your flex plate and hold it in place so you can put this on. This is almost necessary to have because when you put these back on, like I said, they're under a lot of torque. You set them to a torque and then a lot of, you know, sequences and angles trying to get the tension on these just perfect. So this is absolutely necessary to hold this all in place, or like I said, you'll just keep turning this engine over and you'll never get this job done. I, on the other hand, already cheated, and I have this on hand tight. Now you can see the way that I'm holding this. I'm holding it kind of up against the block still while I'm taking this bolt out. There's a reason for that. I'll explain here in just a second, okay? All right. There's the cam bolt. It's actually called a valve by GM, and there's a reason for that. I'll show you in just a second. Let's get this out first. Best way to do this is to grab not the thin sheet metal, but to actually grab the teeth right here. And you're going to slide that and the lower gear out with it. And it's all going to come off as one nice assembly. One thing I would like to show you, while I was saying to not grab it by this thin sheet metal, to grab it by the actual gear itself behind. This is under a spring tension here. There's kind of like a clock spring, but it's under a lot of tension. And it is, once you take that bolt out, there's nothing holding this in place. GM actually recommends you get a couple really fat zip ties and zip tie this together. Or if you do a VVT delete using like a comp cams or a Texas speed kit or whatever, what have you, they actually include a big bolt and nut to hold these two together so this doesn't pop off. If it does, it can fly off and damage things, including you, and it's almost impossible to get back together, to the point where these are cheap enough to where you would just buy a new one and throw this in the trash. So again, learn from our customers' mistakes, learn from our mistakes. Please do not ever pull on this thin sheet metal piece right here on this upper gear. So now that you have taken all this off, you finally got to the root of the issue, the whole reason you're having to pull pretty much your engine down to a short block, just still mounted in your truck or car, and that is the camshaft. All the lifters have now been pulled out. Now that you pulled the heads off, your next step is to finally get in here and change this camshaft. There are these 4 Torx bits. They take a T40 Torx bit, and of course I do have it on a socket wrench for a reason. You're probably going to need at least a 3.5 inch extension or 3 inch extension to get there and get to it. Let's take these off. Woo! They sticky. So now you've used your T40 socket, you've gotten these bolts off. They are a bit of a tapered seat bolt, and it keeps this all centered and aligned. Let's take this camshaft retainer off. It does have a little bit of a seal in there to seal on this oil passage. This is very, very important. If you take yours off and enough miles have gone by and this is perfectly flat. Like, yeah, I can feel this is a higher mileage engine, and I can feel it with even through my gloves that this pressed in O-ring is no longer sticking out from the surface. You can put this on and experience oil pressure issues. There's a few issues that you can do here that can cause an oil pressure problem when you put this all back together. You fire up your truck and the oil pressure gauge isn't reading the same as before. This is one of those big ones. If you take this off and experience this, do not put this back on. Do not blob a big thing of RTV on there. It won't hold. These are very cheap. New bolts are very cheap. Another area, do not skimp on this. Do this right, so make sure. Pretty important. But now that we got this out, we can finally take this camshaft out. Now, it is a little hard to snag one of these and pull it out. You're wanting to do this pretty carefully. I like to use a nice big long screwdriver that fits in these threads here, because you're not reusing this cam. Be careful. I'm doing this very carefully. I'm using some leverage here and leverage with my hand. I'm going very slow and gentle. It'll come through on the bearing journals, and then as you pull past it, it'll fall between them again. You're wanting to make sure not to ding up the cam bearings with the lobes of the cam, so go easy. Don't be cranking this thing out of there. Again, learn from my mistakes. The good news is, being a V6 engine, the cam is lighter and shorter, so you get this done pretty quick. And there she is. Give you kind of a quick explanation here. This weird 3-lobed thing on the back here, this isn't doing a valve so much for your valve train, it's actually your high pressure pump actuator. So that's actually just kind of a neat little fun fact there if you're taking this apart and wondering what in the world all this is doing, as well as if you're wondering why these cam journals are solid and that one's got a groove and holes in it. That there is what feeds this little camshaft actuator valve. And actually, I'll take a moment to explain that to you pretty quick. The VVT system in these engines is actually really, really reliable. Just like we said in our other DOD Delete videos. You are deleting displacement on demand or active fuel management. You are not deleting VVT. It's actually much harder to delete VVT on a Gen 5 engine, and it doesn't matter anyway. You want to keep it. It is what makes these engines have a broader power range. So it can have low end torque as well as a little bit of extra in the top end. And it does that with this little piece here, and it goes into the camshaft upper timing gear, or sometimes they call it the actual VVT actuator, because that is technically what it is. And if I can maybe get a little close enough, there we go, take a look at that. It's got all these different holes in it, and this little piece here pushes in and out. That's that actuator on the timing cover. That will help advance or retard the camshaft for more torque on the low end, more horsepower on the top end. And it actually does that a lot smarter. It isn't just oil pressure. It does that through the computer. The computer wants to know when you're lower load going down the highway and cruising, or when you're really grunting and you're trying to tow a boat or something like that. So pretty unique little system. Surprisingly, about as reliable gets. The only time we recommend deleting that is if you go to big camshafts. And as of right now, there are no camshafts for these. We're looking to change that in a future video, but you definitely want to keep this system. So again, pretty neat little feature. So now that you've got the old camshaft out, let's get the new one in. So here we are with the new camshaft. Now, truth be told, this is a true GM camshaft. We do not do regrinds here. We definitely don't deal in used parts. So you are getting a brand new GM camshaft. When you take these out of the box, check them for damage. You do not want to put anything in here if it's been dinged up on any of these lobes or any of these bearing journals. This is very important. All you'll do is put this in here, it'll get chewed up, it'll be catastrophic. Accidents do happen during shipping and of course during storage in our warehouse. A lot of times everything goes perfectly fine. We get a call every now and again, a couple times a year, where something gets damaged. We'll always take care of you. So please give us a call. We'll make sure to get this figured out if anything happens to this. Also, if you accidentally drop it in the driveway, just give us a call. We'll sell you another one too, because I've done that myself. But one thing to keep in mind here, make sure these are nice and clean. Some of the packaging every once in a while can get a little dirty. It's nothing more than usually dust or little remnants of cardboard pieces or whatnot out of the box. get a lint-free rag, some parts washing solvent. Make sure to get this nice and cleaned up so you're not just cramming this in there and spreading around that debris inside your engine. It's pretty common when you're dealing with new parts. You still have to kind of clean them up before you can actually use them. Now, if you noticed, it does look the same as the old cam. It's just clean. It does have the same cutout in the journal for the VVT, has the same lobe on the back, and that's because these are almost the exact same cam. Again, we say this in all of our DOD videos. We have customers that still ask about it all the time. It is absolutely required to change the camshaft, even if your old camshaft is not damaged. While the specs for these camshafts are the same, they have the same lobe separation, lift, and duration. The lobes do have a slightly different pattern on them for that DOD function. If you try to reuse your old camshaft, go through all this trouble, get it retuned, you will go down the road and get a misfire code, and it will cause you issues, and you'll have to take this all back apart and do it again. So please, once again, learn from people prior to us that have done this before. Make sure that you don't make the same mistakes. These are actually very cheap anyway, because this is a production camshaft. This is actually out of an engine called an LV1 instead of an LV3. Not a very high production engine. They used them mostly in the express vans and a handful of certain market pickup trucks. But this was literally the same 4.3 without the DOD function. So that's what we're using. We're using all factory stuff to get the benefit. I'll give you a little bit of a fun fact. While this engine is a 4.3 liter, it actually shares a lot of its parts with the 5.3 liter. The cam specs, exact same as a 5.3 in the trucks. Cylinder heads, same thing. It's a 5.3 head with a couple cylinders lopped off. Pretty neat stuff that they did. So you get the benefits of high flowing heads and good parts. So when you're putting this cam back in, same thing. Be very, very careful. Just like when you were pulling the cam out, you got to be careful putting it in. You can do the exact same amount of damage. I would recommend putting a little bit of a lubricant on these journals here. I put a very, very thin film on some of the journals. It will lube up the moment it fires up, but I did it just for this assembly to keep everything kind of cleaner. Use a large or long 3/8 extension in the end here instead of the screwdriver. Screwdriver will damage the threads. This won't. But you're going to need this leverage when you get further in. So, nice and easy. That was good. Simple as that. Like I was saying before, if you need to, grab another cam retainer plate if the seal on yours has been squished beyond recognition. The cam retainer plate and the bolts are very inexpensive. When you get a new plate, you do need some new bolts. And make sure, as you can see here, the difference between these two gaskets was terrible. So let's go ahead and put this back on. It uses the same T40 bits. Now, this is where your first torque wrench use is going to come in. We're going to give you the torque specs for this, so you have all the information that you need when you're doing the work. But these particular bolts have a very specific torque to them. It's 11 foot-pounds. Do it too loose, like I said, you might end up with a couple issues. If you do this too tight, I have actually seen several times where somebody thought they were big He-Man and they grabbed a wrench and they said, I know what 11 foot-pounds feels like, and they did 80. And they took these bolts, crammed it into this, and because of the tapered seat, it actually split this cam retainer plate. Do not make that mistake. You are going to need torque wrenches anywhere for this job, so go ahead and get it out, get it set up to 11 foot-pounds, and get to work. All right, so now that we've gotten that torqued to 11 foot-pounds again, not inch-pounds, foot-pounds, we are ready to put this back together. We're kind of reversing this process. We're still going to show you the steps along the way. Now, you haven't had to turn the engine over, so your lower timing sprocket here should still have the dot facing up. So you just grab your actuator slash upper cam gear and make sure that's dot's pointing down. One question I will answer that we get a lot of you guys are used to kind of older school engines. You always ask, do I need to change my timing chain or any of these sprockets? If they're in good shape, they're absolutely designed to be reused. Trust me when I say that these engines are designed to run hundreds of thousands of miles. As long as they're properly maintained, you really won't run into any issues. If you feel like you don't mind spending an extra couple bucks just for the comfort and the peace of mind, we recommend that the teeth on these are always in really great shape. These can be reused. You can just get another timing chain from us and head on down the road. But our kits don't include them because most of the time they're absolutely not necessary. A little trick I'm going to give you, go ahead and pull that lower timing gear back all the way out. I got it up against the bolt again. And grab this with the chain and look for that lower mark one more time. Now you can kind of see where that dowel is going to be. You can kind of help yourself out, rotate that cam where it's going to need to be, and get it right in the right spot. I think I'm pretty close. Yeah, I'm really close. Okay. And with that pulled out, you can actually get right here and you can actually line this up before you ever have to slide it on. So you're not constantly pulling it on and off. And there we go. Again, do not grab the sheet metal part of the gear, and then you're just going to slide this whole assembly back. Oh, I think I nailed it. Perfect. Now, for demonstration purposes, we're going to be reusing this old cam bolt. We're going to be taking this whole engine apart again, but we're going to be doing that off camera. We do include a new bolt, just like we include a new balancer bolt. There is a really good reason for that. A lot of people want to reuse these. Yes, we've heard of people that have reused these and not had any issues. But these are also a torque to yield kind of situation. They are put in at a very heavy torque. We've also had people that have reused these and this is broken on them when they're tightening it. That's why we include a new one. Again, the kit includes it for that very reason, and it's just not that expensive, so saving a couple bucks sometimes isn't worth the trouble. Now that you've gotten that on, it's time to torque this bolt up. You can now pull your little Allen key you use as a retaining pin like a grenade. Oh, good thing it didn't explode. So, but keep an eye on this tensioner and the guide on the other side as well. These are a pretty inexpensive assembly. If for some reason you have excessive wear like ours did, as you can see, ours is brand new too, and we put it on there. Most of the time they're reusable. Ours was not. Mostly because of that wear, and mostly because I actually broke it while taking it apart, but that's okay. We have no problem admitting when we make mistakes here at Scoggin-Dickey, so it's all right. Learn from us. But now it's time to torque this bolt. Now we're going to have the specs listed for you. It is a base torque that you are going to use with your torque wrench, and then after that it's going to be a series of angles, just like your cylinder heads, just like your balancer bolt. You will need a special tool that most auto parts stores sell. It's very inexpensive. It actually sets it up to where you can actually see the amount of angle that you get when you turn it. I will admit I don't happen to have one here because I'm a little spoiled. I have friends that have very high dollar torque wrenches that are digital, and they actually have a nice digital readout that show me all that. So you don't have to spend bucks like some of my friends have. You can run down your local auto parts store, and for about 20 bucks you can get one of those tools, and they do work really, really well. So we'll have those specs listed here. Make sure to get that nice and torqued down, and then it's off to the next step. Now it's time to put the balance shaft chain and tensioner assembly back on. And again, this is the process that we have come up with that's easiest for y'all that are doing it at home. You will notice that since we got the upper and lower timing gears aligned, again, that arrow that's pointing inward is perfectly at the 9 o'clock position. And I'm going to show you how to time this up. It's not hard at all. Like I said before, the balance shaft sprocket itself has a dash pointing up and a dot pointing at the 3 o'clock position. If you look very closely, we'll get a close-up shot for you here. These chain links have a couple dark links on them. GM calls them blue. I think after some usage they actually turn black. But you're going to need to line those links up with the arrow at the 9 o'clock on the cam and the dot at the 3 o'clock on the balance shaft. Again, this is all to make sure this is in time so this runs nice and smooth, just like it did when it was stock. We get some questions about this. We've had a couple customers that call up and they're wanting to delete the balance shaft. It's not that you can't. It's that this system doesn't really have that much drag. There's not a lot of parasitic loss on this. You're not, wasting 20 horsepower by having this in. It's probably worth a couple horsepower at best. and it's not even that heavy. I took all this out and weighed it. It was just a few pounds. I know that everybody thinks that doing all these extra steps are going to help. If you do want to delete this system, it's not that you can't. Make sure you get the journals on this. They look like cam bearings. They have oil feed holes in it. If you take this out and don't put anything in its place to block that off, you'll have zero oil pressure because it'll be shooting straight out of those into nothing. So get those plugged off somehow. Some people pull the bearing out, reclock it, put it back in, or drill and tap and put an Allen plug in. Again, we personally think that's a little bit of overkill. Like I said, we're going to be doing some cam testing on this engine in the future. It's going to be pretty cool. We're really excited about it. You will see that we will be leaving the balance shaft in for every single test because we believe that this is not going to make that big of a difference at all. It's important to get this on there right, or this will shake your teeth out, because then this balance shaft that's causing this engine to stay nice and smooth is now going to be out of balance, so it'll actually accentuate those vibrations and shake you to death. So do not get this wrong. I found it is best to go from the side and come in on top of that spring at an angle. If you get it just right, you might have to do it a couple times. It took me a little bit of work, but luckily this isn't the hard part. There we go. And once you get it aligned in, again, hold it with one hand, you grab your other bolt, and you put it back in. Just get it nice and hand tight for a second, double check those links. Make sure that that link is lined up with that mark, which it is, and this dark link is lined up with this mark here, which it is. Once you've confirmed that everything is lined up, push that back down with your hand again and do a nice snug up here to hold it at slack. The next thing you're going to do is put your guide back in. Now you remember you lift that bolt out just a bit. You're going to hang this back in there. Slide it in just right. Perfect. Look at that. Spoolie turbo. And once you've gotten those two bolts torqued with your little Torx bit, now it's time to finally set the tension for this. Just like we pulled a pin on here, we're going to undo this bolt here. There it goes. And it snugs up here. GM recommends a little bit of slack in this. They have an actual tool that's about 1 millimeter thick, almost a credit card actually for a good tip. I've used a couple different things in trying this out and gotten the exact setting. Once you do finally get that just very mild slack, you'll get it and set it back up again. And you will torque this down and be done. And you'll have just a little bit of chain play just like that. And now it's ready to put the front cover on and be done. Now that we've gotten all that done, put the oil pump back on. Remember, we haven't touched these alignment dowels, so it's going to go on perfectly. It takes a little bit of fiddling to get this on there. This inner gear lines up on that lower timing sprocket, so it takes a second to get it lined up. Real quick, I want to show you something. You can actually see how the top part of that oil pump is all chewed up. One of the many methods we were told about was to use a pair of pliers and wrenches and screwdrivers to pry all this off without removing the oil pump so you didn't have to remove the oil pan. Please don't do that. I tried that method, which gouged up this oil pump. It was successful, but man, it wasn't any easier. And honestly, I didn't feel very comfortable taking something like a screwdriver to my timing chain. This is an engine. We don't want to damage anything. So please don't try to do any shortcuts. I found that most of the shortcuts weren't really a shortcut at all. So do this properly. That way, you don't have to worry about it in the future. So now they got your oil pump lined on. It takes a little bit of effort. Sometimes you might have to use a small screwdriver to get this center oil pump drive gear inside the oil pump lined up on that timing chain gear. Be delicate, be gentle, take your time, don't get frustrated. It just takes a minute to get all those teeth lined up just right. Now, I've put the bolts on and I've done them hand snug and then backed them off about half a turn for a little bit of looseness. So I can sit here and move this around a little bit. Then, using one hand, you kind of just push up on the engine. Not crazy, you're not trying to lift it off the truck, but pushing it up against those. And then snug these bolts down. And then take the alignment tools off. Now it's time to put the front cover on. Now this is kind of nice. You don't have to line this up with a special tool that goes over the snout of the crankshaft like on the LS's. These actually have dowels, back to like old school small block Chevy, so it's pretty nice. Take a razor, go gently, and scrape all the old silicone sealant off the front of the engine and this cover. You will need to get some oil safe, usually in gray or maybe sometimes black sealant, and you will put a very thin filament on here, consistent all the way through, but not so much you're putting blobs inside of the engine. You don't want this stuff falling out into your oil pan and then getting sucked up in the pickup tube where you'll end up with oil starvation issues. Make sure to plug your connector back onto your oil pump and then put the front cover back on. And remember, your timing cover is different thicknesses at different spots. It's thinner here on the sides, fatter 3 up here, and a couple fat ones down there. So you're gonna have to have the right length bolts. Also, don't forget the plastic sleeves. Make sure you don't mix them up and put one on a bolt when the hole already has one. Good. Now it's time to put the cylinder heads back on the engine. By now you have put all your new non-DOD lifters and guides back in the engine and tightened down with the proper bolts. But that's pretty self-explanatory. One thing I wanted to show you specifically is getting the surface on these heads cleaned up right. Do not use a metal razor blade scraper like I have in my hand here. These are aluminum and this will take chunks off the aluminum. If you do it diligently, you can do it on areas of the oil pan and the front cover, but it's very critical not to mess up this surface. You're sealing a gasket here. It's holding in compression, it's holding in heat, it's holding in coolant. It has to be done right. They make little plastic razors. These are actually pretty nifty. Believe me, you're gonna go through a lot doing this. Buy a whole bunch. I bought a big box of them, or actually a couple boxes of them. And it takes time. This is the one nobody likes to hear. This will take you over an hour to get both banks done on heads and block. But this all needs to be cleaned off properly. This will not damage the aluminum, and it'll make sure your gasket seals properly so you don't have to do this again. So now you got your brand new GM head gasket on the engine when your cylinder head on. We do of course include brand new GM cylinder head bolts. They're the same bolts for all the holes, unlike some of the LS engines and some of the LT engines. They were kind of different lengths and different styles. These are the same all the way around, so it keeps it nice and simple. Keep in mind, you do have to do a torque sequence on this. You will set a base torque in a specific spiral pattern, just like always, and a couple more sequences of angles, so you'll get your angle gauge back out. Make sure to do this properly, take your time, and count off as needed so you don't screw this up like I have. So now they got your cylinder head torqued down, ready to go. One of the last things before you put your valve cover back on is going to be your rocker arms and your push rods. Push rods are the same length for all cylinders, intake and exhaust. Same goes for your rocker arms. They're not different like they are in some of the, old LS3 engines had slightly different rocker for intake and exhaust. It keeps it pretty simple. Personally, I like to do this a bit of a one at a time. You can go ahead and plop these in and get these kind of hand snugged up, but what I like to do is crank the engine over. We'll give you the torque specs on the rocker arms, but I like to torque the rocker arm down when it is on the base circle of the actual valve spring. You don't want this valve spring being compressed when you're trying to tighten this down. It not only affects your torque sequence, using these threads in the cylinder to push that down, you can actually damage these. So be very careful, make sure to do this right. And now you can finally put on the rocker arm cover, and of course make sure you do this on both sides. The rest of the steps here is some of the stuff we were telling you about at the beginning. I don't have a vehicle here to show you a lot of those steps. Putting the balancer on it, again, make sure you use a balancer install tool. Do not hammer that thing on there. You'll damage the inside of the balance or the rotating assembly. And of course, take your time. Make sure you do the right torque sequences on things like the fuel system up here. A lot of that's very special. That's a high pressure fuel system. You're not wanting to mess that up. We appreciate you guys stopping by for another one of our weekly tech videos. This one, like we were saying, was pretty special. We wanted to show you what it took to do this. Again, not a full DIY video. We hope to maybe do some more of those in the future for you. But this, we really just wanted to dig more into this, show you this really cool platform and a little bit of the process to help you guys out. We will be including the torque specs for everything you got to touch here in the documents tab on the SD Parts website. Underneath this part number, if you scroll down to the bottom, we always have a little section there that has shipping information, part information, stuff like that. There's another one that'll say documents. We're going to include some pictures and some torque specs to kind of help you guys out. We'll probably be doing the same thing to our other DOD kits as well, maybe to help out some of your future customers. We're really excited about this engine. Now, I know we did this, and this is all stock application, stock cam, stock parts, but I'll let you guys in on a little bit of a tip. We actually plan on doing a little bit of research and development on maybe boosting some of the performance on these. Like we said, the cylinder heads on these are just like a 5.3. They're really high compression, they're 11-to-1. They're really strong bottom ends. We really think they'll respond well to light modifications like camshafts, nitrous, maybe some boost, dreaming big here, but we hope that you'll follow us along for that. So please, give us a like, a subscribe, and a share on both Facebook and YouTube like we say every week to help out hot rodders like you and me. And so maybe you can follow along on some of the cool stuff we got going on for both this engine and maybe some of these other project cars once I can get to them. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next Friday. Here's a good little fun fact that probably won't make it into the video. If you ever buy a cheap socket wrench and it breaks, keep that little piece right there from the inner guts of it all, and it makes a nice little something where you can actually grab it and just turn it with your hands.